Welcome, everybody, to the webinar. I'm Dave Rosenfeld, the Director of Solar Rights Alliance, and with me is...
Hi, folks. I'm Kaylee Underhill, the Advocacy and Development Director with Solar Rights Alliance.
And as you know, the Solar Rights Alliance is the nonprofit association of California solar customers. We believe that everyone has the right to make energy from the sun without unreasonable interference from the utility. And today we're doing a webinar that's going through new data that shows how California's rooftop solar consumers are saving all ratepayers lots and lots of money, more than $1 billion in 2024 alone. And in the course of doing that, we're going to unpack some of the claims, the misleading and false claims by the utilities and others that are saying that rooftop solar customers are to blame for higher rates, which is absolute nonsense. And this data is going to walk through how to do that. So we're going to do all of that. And then we're also going to go through some of the damage that's been done, that the Newsom administration has done to rooftop solar and what the impact has been. And then finally, how we can turn this ship around and make rooftop solar available to everyday people again in a really big way, and all the ways with which that can help both individual consumers cut their electricity bill, but also to help all ratepayers save money and lower electricity costs for the benefit of all Californians. So we're going to get started. We're going to share a screen, and we're going to go through a presentation that with some slides, and then when we're done, we'll conclude. And if you have questions about any of the content that we're going through, we want to really encourage you to put your questions either in the comments section or to send us an email at info@solarrights.org. We're very committed to responding to all of your comments and questions. We want you to understand all of this. And in the show notes underneath, you'll also see a website that you can go to that has the sources for all of this information, including the slide deck that we're about to present. And even that slide deck has all of the sources written down. We take that very, very seriously. Kaylee, is there any other housekeeping that I'm forgetting?
Just to say that if you do want to email us with a question, we'll put our email address in the show notes as well, but it's info, @solarrights.org. And like Dave said, we're very committed to answering your questions. It is the two of us answering those questions, so it might take us a hot second, but we'll get there. So please do reach out with any questions that you have.
All right, good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And so there's that usual kind of short stutter step before the computer knows what's going on. And Kaylee, can you just give me a read that you can see this screen? Okay. So why don't you take it away? We're going to be talking about how we're going to get rooftop solar growing for everyone and all of the little details in the current very hotly charged debate here in California. The utilities have really made a proper mess of the facts, and so let's get the facts straight. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the facts that we need to clarify right away is this one here. The utilities have been trying to say that rooftop solar is only for rich white people, and that just flat out isn't true. 61% of all rooftop solar users are working in middle class, and 52% are people of color. And I think this is one of those moments where it's worth pausing and taking a look at the footnote of this particular slide. This data comes from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab Solar Demographics tool, and it includes single-family solar adopters. It doesn't include multifamily solar projects or commercial installations in disadvantaged communities. And if it did, then the data that you see here would show an even higher skew towards lower income families and minority communities. There are hundreds and hundreds of these projects that are either being completed or underway that aren't reflected here. So just really want to start right off the bat debunking this lie, and then we'll move from here. So another thing to clarify right off the bat is what rooftop solar is actually doing to help reduce the cost of the grid as a whole. As I think many folks here know, obviously the energy that's coming from the solar panels is helping to offset the real-time energy use of the home with the solar panels. That's that home right there in the center. But it also means that when those panels are generating extra energy and the home has used what it needs in real time, that extra energy flows right out to those neighboring homes. So the neighbors actually get to use that extra energy. And as a result, the utilities don't have to deliver as much energy to that whole row of homes, which is the same thing as that row of homes becoming more energy efficient. It benefits everybody. And that solar owner, the person with those panels, is actually still paying a bill. On average, solar users pay an $80 to about $160 a month utility bill. So they are also paying their fair share of the grid while helping their neighbors be more energy efficient and reducing strain on the grid as a whole. So back to you, Dave, for some more details on these pieces.
Yes. Okay, so I know this chart might be a little hard on the eyes, but I'm going to make the case that this is the best chart ever. And I hope that you agree. And if you don't, or you still don't understand it, like we said, send us an email, info@solarrights.org, or put a question in the comments section. Okay, so what you have here is electricity demand on August 7th of this past year, 2004. It was a typical hot summer day when pretty much everywhere in the state, from top to bottom, was cranking their air conditioners in a really, really big way. And the colors represent the different sources of where the electricity came from. So you've got your natural gas over here. You've got these wind farms and solar farms. And then this is on a time scale from electricity demand from midnight to midnight. And so I want to go through a couple of things that are remarkable about this. This line right here, just above the mustard color, and by the way, this is solar farms right here, electricity from solar farms. But this line right here, this represents everything that's underneath that line is the electricity that the utility delivered to the people of California. Everything that's underneath the mustard and later on, underneath the green. All right. This electricity right here that's striped is rooftop solar, California's 2 million rooftop solar consumers. This is electricity that was consumed for sure, but it was made by 2 million consumers and consumed there either at the home or locally. The utility did not have to deliver this electricity. And if you notice, where's the peak? The peak is basically the middle of the day, around 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So what's interesting is even with the pandemic and work from home and all that kind of stuff, the major peak in electricity demand is happening in the middle of the day. And rooftop solar, try and imagine what it would be like if these 2 million rooftop solar consumers didn't exist. That would mean that the utility would have to work even harder to deliver electricity to meet this peak demand, but they don't. They only have to do this. This represents right here, folks, this rooftop solar, this is billions of dollars in infrastructure and generation that the utilities did not have to spend money on, and thus you did not have to pay for as a result. This right here represents blackouts that did not happen because when we hit these peak demand times, the utility didn't have to work as hard to make sure that we got electricity to all the places that need it. So this is huge, and the utilities never talk about this, and the opponents of rooftop solar never talk about this, and yet this is absolutely remarkable, and this has been going on for a long time. I want to show you another thing that's interesting about this chart, which is over here, this is batteries. So these are batteries that were charged with the excess solar energy that was made during the day, both the rooftop solar and the solar farms over here. And then as the sun goes down, those batteries start to get to work. And you can see they're starting, there's not that much, but it's growing. And so what you can see here is the beginnings of the future, that if this keeps growing and this keeps growing and the batteries keep growing, then eventually all of this lumpiness down here starts to go away. And eventually we don't have to rely on these sources of energy as much. And so rooftop solar is a really key part of all of this because it is making it easier for the utilities to do their part and also saving consumers money in the form of avoided infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk about that a lot more later. So I would maintain this is the best chart ever. Now I want to contrast this with this chart. This is basically the same thing. It is electricity demand from midnight to midnight, but it is not during a hot summer day. It is on a balmy spring day in April, when it's sunny. The days are getting longer, but it's very mild. So nobody's running much of any kind of appliance with respect to heating and cooling. And you may have seen the headlines. They pop up every 6 months or so that scream, "We have too much solar in California. We're sending it all out of state. This whole thing is a disaster." And those headlines are clickbait. They're not very helpful. They muddy the conversation. And the data that those headlines focus on is these outlier days in the spring. When, yes, because we have these solar farms and they are oftentimes producing a little bit more electricity than what's being consumed in the middle of the day. And so thus, yeah, some of it does get either curtailed or sent out of state. Um, there's a couple of things, though, that are just wrongheaded about fixating on this. First is that we build the grid for the peak demand. That's what we do it for. So we build the grid for August 7th of this last year, a hot summer day. We build it because that's the days that we're going to need to deliver as much electricity. Nobody complains about a highway not being used at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That's because we don't build the highway for use for 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. We build it for rush hour traffic in the middle of the work week. These headlines that complain about too much solar is sort of the equivalent of complaining about nobody using a highway at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And so it really misses the point. The other thing that it misses the point is just going, people are switching to electric cars and electric appliances. So electricity use is going up in a really, really big way. And whether you like it or not, the state wants to get off fossil fuels. Well, there's an awful lot of fossil fuel energy over here. And in any event, electricity demand is going to be increasing in the coming years. So if the state is serious about all of these goals that they want to do, you're going to want to have a lot more of this rooftop solar over here. You're going to want to have a lot more of these solar farms over here, and you're going to want to have a lot more batteries, excuse me. So just as a point, those headlines really miss the point. And the next time you look at it, just go, are they talking about a peak demand hot summer day, or are they talking about an outlier day in the spring? And if it's an outlier day in the spring, then you can tell that reporter that they really need to do their homework a little bit better. So you might then be going, okay, well, that's nice. You just showed me a chart about August 7th. And, that seems kind of cool. But, what is that really, that seems, is that a one-time event, or is that like an ongoing thing? It's an ongoing thing. So what you have here is what the last 20 years have looked like in terms of electricity demand. This dashed red line represents what the state thought electricity demand was going to look like from 2004 to 2022-ish, 2023. It's what they thought electricity demand was going to be. And what actually happened is this kind of curvy-ish blue line. This is actual peak electricity demand. And you can see there's some lumps, but overall, peak electricity demand has been relatively flat over that time period. So what happened? Did people not consume as much electricity as what the state planners counted on? No, they did. They did actually do that. But all of that additional consumption that happened over the last 20 years or so was soaked up by the rooftop solar that got installed over that same time period. It's almost the difference between actual peak demand and the projected peak demand is the same, almost the same amount of megawatts as what went in on people's rooftops over the last 15 years or so. It's a remarkable story of how consumers paid their own money to make their own electricity and essentially made it so that the state didn't have to, and we're going to get to that they did it anyway, but didn't have to work as hard to meet that peak demand, didn't have to spend as much money to meet that peak electricity demand. And this is a key lesson to learn as we go into the future. The question is going to be, is the government, is the utilities, is that whole complex going to learn from all of this? Or are they just going to keep barreling ahead and making the same mistakes over and over and over again to the detriment of all ratepayers? So that's really the big open question. And looking ahead, I think we know what the answer is. And so this blue bar over here represents what state planners estimate is going to be the increase in electricity consumption due to electrification, people getting electric cars and electric appliances. It's a lot of electricity consumption. And the actual amount doesn't matter that much. If the word terawatt hours doesn't really mean anything to you, that's okay. What you can see here is just there's going to be a lot more electricity consumption. If rooftop solar adoptions return just to the rate that they were in 2021, if we just went back to the rate with which consumers were adopting rooftop solar in 2021, then this is only how much the utilities would have to deliver in order to meet that increased electricity consumption. The rest of it would be soaked up by all of that new solar. People would essentially meet their own demand. They would power their own electric cars, et cetera, et cetera. And so that makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't we want that to happen rather than having to build expensive power plants and transmission lines and that kind of thing? Again, these are the questions that now we are faced with as we go forward. So, who is this guy and why we have this on the screen? What we've done here is tried to kind of give you a baseline story of, what of the facts. But I think as many of you know, this is probably why you're watching, the utilities have told a different story. They have been lying through their teeth and essentially blaming rooftop solar for California's high rates. And there's way too many people in the government, at the Utilities Commission, frankly, all the way up to Governor Newsom, who have repeated this lie. And you've also seen some academics coming out of UC Berkeley. There's like a small handful of nonprofit organizations, and they all seem to be making this claim. It's a lie. And but us just saying that, you probably want some evidence. And so we are turning here now to some data that's been put together by an energy economist, Dr. Richard McCann. And he has done a deep dive into the most recent claim by the Public Utilities Commission that that rooftop solar customers are to blame for high rates. And the specific claim that the CPUC made was that, and it was an arm of the CPUC that made this claim, the public advocate, Kaylee will talk about this more in a moment. They claim that in 2024, rooftop solar customers essentially skipped out on $8.5 billion of grid costs and forced people that don't have solar to pay that, but basically pick up the tab. That they essentially shifted $8.5 billion of grid costs over to people that don't have solar. And so Dr. McCann, to the CPUC's credit, they actually showed their math. So it was relatively easy for an economist to go in and look at their math and evaluate it. And then he published a study, and Kaylee is going to tell you what the study found.
So first, just to reiterate what Dave said here about where this claim is coming from, the Public Advocate's Office is an arm of the California Public Utilities Commission, or the CPUC. For anyone who's not familiar, the CPUC is an unelected body of 5 commissioners, all appointed in this case by Governor Newsom. The Public Advocate's Office is not an independent organization or watchdog. They are literally an arm. They sit inside of the CPUC building, and the director of the PAO is also a political appointee. So this group, the Public Advocate's Office, made this ludicrous claim that rooftop solar users are costing everybody else $8.5 billion. And that claim was so ludicrous, so extreme, that really for the first time, they kind of had to show their work. People were like, I don't know about that. You gotta show us for once where this is coming from. So they did, as Dave said, to their credit, they did. They opened up their spreadsheet and said, okay, this is where we're getting this from. This is how we're calculating this. In doing so, it allowed energy economist Dr. Richard McCann to look at that spreadsheet, to crack it open and see what was inside. And as he analyzed this $8.5 billion number, he realized that the Public Advocate's Office had made a series of mistakes. And each of these blue blocks here represents a mistake. And those mistakes are billion-dollar mistakes. And I'd like to take you through them one at a time. We really want to spend some time with this slide because this is perhaps the most key chunk of information we have to offer, and we want to make sure folks feel really comfortable with this and understand what's going on here. So on the left, you have this big orange bar, which is the initial $8.5 billion claim by the Public Advocate's Office. And we're just going to start there and then take it down chunk by chunk. And I think you'll see at the end that really what's happening here is that rooftop solar is not only not a cost to other ratepayers, but actually saves all ratepayers $1.49 billion in 2024. So taking this one step at a time, the first big block is called self-generation. The Public Advocate's Office is making the claim that the energy that rooftop solar users actually produce and use on site, the energy that never touches the grid, is somehow a cost to other ratepayers. And that is just ridiculous. Again, self-generation is rooftop solar energy that is entirely produced and used on someone's property. That is energy the utilities do not need to make, move, or maintain. And as a result, it is not a cost to any other ratepayer. So just starting there, that takes that $8.5 billion claim and knocks it down by 3.99 billion. Okay, so now we're at the next block, which
Shannon,
Dr. McCann, sorry, yes.
may I jump in for just one additional point on this? Self-generation would you agree that self-generation is the equivalent of turning off your lights?
Indeed. It is the same thing as any form of energy efficiency, where you are simply using less energy that you're drawing from the grid. So it's the exact same thing as turning off the lights, turning down your air conditioning, turning down your heat, hang drying your clothing. It's all the same thing, and it is not a cost to other ratepayers. It does not cause rates to rise. In fact, it's good. It's a good thing because it, again, saves that overall strain on the grid. So yes, exactly. So that's 3.99 billion down. Now we have this next chunk, which Dr. McCann has labeled here rates and solar output. And this actually refers to two things that are happening here. One is that the Public Advocate's Office made the assumption in their calculations that all rooftop solar users pay one flat rate. And of course they don't. That just is not what the rate plan is for rooftop solar users. They're on a time of use rate for the most part that varies with the time of day. The second mistake that they made was using the wrong number for basically the amount of energy that a solar panel is predicted to produce in the state of California. It's called the capacity factor, and it's a percentage of how much energy, the panel itself can produce. And we know this number for any solar panel anywhere. We know the capacity factor if the solar panel sits on a roof in Seattle or New York City or LA. And they chose the wrong number, an inflated number, which when corrected, when these two things are corrected, drops this claim down again by another 2.46 billion. Okay, so now we're getting close to zero, that $0 line where there is no cost shift. And McCann wasn't finished. He then took a look at, okay, if we have 2 million solar rooftops and about 100,000 batteries on the grid right now in people's, on their roofs and in their garages and basements, then okay, what do the utilities not have to build or buy? And in looking at that number, that saved everyone 2.16 billion. All right, so we started at 8.5 billion, knocked off the correction for not including self-generation as a cost, corrected the actual rate that solar users pay and what a solar panel actually produces, and then corrected again for historic utility savings, and we're at zero. There's no cost shift. But McCann wasn't finished either and continued with two more categories. The first is what he's labeled here as the displaced care subsidy. For anyone who doesn't know, CARE is a electricity subsidy bill program that helps low-income folks pay their bills, and all ratepayers essentially pay into that pot of funds. There are plenty of CARE customers that have rooftop solar, about 15%, and the Public Advocate's Office assumed that there weren't any CARE customers that had rooftop solar. So if you include the number of CARE customers that have rooftop solar and therefore are drawing less electricity from the grid, that's a smaller pot that the rest of everyone else is paying into. So it actually saves everyone $160 million with that displacement of that subsidy. And then the last piece is customer bill payments. The Public Advocate's Office made the assumption that rooftop solar users don't pay a bill, and that just isn't true. On average, Rooftop solar customers, as we said earlier, have a monthly bill of about $80 to $160 a month, which is more than their fair share, even according to the utilities, for covering the grid that they do use. And so here you have it, folks. You start with an $8.5 billion claim by the Public Advocate's Office. McCann corrects it down, corrects it down, corrects it down. And at the end of the day, here we actually see that rooftop solar has saved all ratepayers in California 1.49 billion in 2024 alone. And I'll hand it back to Dave to put a finer point on another error that the California Public Utility Commission and Public Advocate's Office have made as they have continued to perpetuate this lie.
Yeah, thank you, Kaylee. And just as a reminder to people who are watching, if you have questions about anything that we're going through here, put it in the comments section or send us an email at info@solarrights.org. We take your questions really seriously. We want to provide you with good information. If you're having trouble locating the sources for this information or the background material, the calculations, we can help you locate it. If you want to verify this info, we take all that stuff very seriously. Okay. So let me just make one point, and then I want to move into answering another big question that people tend to have about this stuff. There are other cost shift studies besides the one that the CPUC/Public Advocate have done. And we wanted to just note that you're going to run into other cost shift studies, and they all make similar mistakes to the one that the Public Advocate's Office made. And then oftentimes they make other mistakes as well. Like, for example, the CPUC has basically a cost benefit analysis of what the value of rooftop solar is going to be going forward. And typically when you do that type of cost benefit analysis, you take a look at the costs and the benefits of the energy asset, is what they call it, which would be a rooftop solar system, over the lifetime of its system. We do this for power plants, we do this for solar farms, and we should be doing it for rooftop solar as well. However, the CPUC, in their calculations, only does the first couple of years of benefits for rooftop solar, and they ignore all the later years. And they don't explain why. This, by the way, is taken directly from the consultant that works for the CPUC. More on that later. And you can see even they admit that the benefits of rooftop solar go up as the years go on, but they didn't include it, and they don't justify or defend why. And by the way, the reason why it goes up in later years is because in later years, it's going to get harder to build solar and wind farms, whereas there's so much rooftop space that starts to become more valuable as the years go on. So you can see there's some serious cherry picking going on as well. Okay, but so now that we've hopefully convinced you that, in fact, rooftop solar is not the reason why rates are so high, and in fact, they help to bring rates down, or at least they help control them and save ratepayers money, then you're probably left asking, why are rates so high? What is the root cause of it? And this is another place that this work, Dr. McCann's work, has helped to clarify. And so the thing here is that the utilities and the Newsom administration are lying to you about why rates are so high. Here's why they're so high. I'm going to come back to this. Rates are so high because utility spending has gone up. That's why. There is literally a 1-to-1 ratio over the last, let's call it, 10 years, 20 years, depending on which utility you're looking at, between their spending on poles and wires and rates. So let's take a look at PG&E, right? This blue line is PG&E's spending on poles and wires, also known as transmission and distribution. And you can see that it's gone up quite a lot since 2013. This dashed yellow line is rates. And you can see that there's almost a complete 1-to-1 ratio between PG&E spending on poles and wires and the rates. By way of comparison, this short dashed line is what PG&E's spending on poles and wires would have been if they had just kept at the pace of inflation. So this is, as you can see, especially in the later years, their spending has really gotten out of whack. And it's the same for the other two major utilities. So here you have Edison, same kind of correlation between spending and rates, and SDG&E, same kind of correlation. And you can see also, how out of whack the spending is with inflation on the whole. All right. So that's why rates are going up. And so to just kind of wrap that piece in a bow, the top blue bar for each of the utilities is the rate hike, and the light blue is the percentage of the rate hike that's due to spending increases. More than 90% of the rate hikes of the last bunch of years for these three utilities are directly attributed to their own spending on poles and wires. That's the heart of it. That's why rates are so high. And utilities do everything they can to try to hide the ball on that this is the source of all the pain, the financial pain that we're feeling. Okay, so then I think reasonable people are asking, well, maybe that's the case, but maybe also that spending is justified. And so we want to kind of go through a few things. Like, for example, people go, well, isn't that spending because of wildfire mitigation? No, it's not actually. Yes, the utilities are spending quite a bit on wildfire mitigation. That is true. And I think we agree, as long as they're spending it the right way, that would be a good thing to do. We have questions about that. But that spending has not been baked into rates yet. That's kind of a quirk in our system where the rates have often there's a delay between their spending and rates. So all of the rate hikes that we have had to contend with over the last like 10 years, it's not wildfire mitigation that's driving that. And in fact, even recently, when the utilities have started to spend a lot more on wildfire mitigation, it's only about 12% in 2023 and 2024 of their total spending. So wildfire mitigation is not why rates are so high. Absolutely not. It might become a big thing, which is why we have to control it and make sure that we're doing it correctly going into the future, but it's not why it's happening right now. So that's just not right. So then you might say, well, hey, maybe all that spending is because the population has grown and the economy has grown and people are starting to electrify. Well, no, that there's no correlation to that either. Remember the stuff that we showed you at the very, very beginning, how over the last 20 years, peak electricity demand has been relatively flat? Well, if peak electricity demand has been relatively flat over that 20-year period, and wildfire mitigation has not been a major factor in rates, then you would expect utility spending on poles and wires to be relatively flat over that same time period too. But look at this. This is the same stuff that we were showing you earlier on utility spending on poles and wires, and it's like gone like a hockey stick, even though this peak electricity demand has been flat. Now, you then might say, well, maybe they're just so forward thinking that they're realizing that starting today, we're going to be using a lot more electricity because people are getting electric cars and that kind of thing. But if that was the case, then why are the utilities now screaming bloody murder about how there isn't enough capacity to meet all of this electrification that's happening? And they're proposing even billions and billions and billions of dollars in new spending for that. You would have thought, hey, look, we made all those investments now and we're all good, but that's not what they're doing. Something else is going on here that's driving all of this utility spending. And that something else is that the utilities make their profits from spending more on poles and wires. They make, in fact, a guaranteed 8 to 10% profit from every dollar they spend building new poles and wires. And even the CPUC acknowledges that the current system incentivizes the utilities to spend more than we might need. Now, it is true that those same regulators rubber stamp that spending that gave the utilities higher profits and higher rates. So that's what's going on here, is the utilities make their money this way, and they want to keep that gravy train going. But it's hard for them to keep that gravy train going because rates are so high, so they need to find a scapegoat. And what's a better scapegoat than rooftop solar? And so that's what they've done. And so I'm going to go back a few slides at the risk of kind of being hard on the eyes to just show you that the cost shift, this whole idea of blaming rooftop solar customers for high rates, it was not cooked up. It didn't come through data. It was cooked up in a by public relations strategists who work for the national utility industry. And this goes back now more than 10 years. We have leaked memos. We have leaked board meeting notes from national utility strategy associations and groups talking about how they need to pin the blame on rooftop solar in order to be able to keep their gravy train going. And they have done a bunch of things over the last 12 or 13 years to make this claim stick in California. And we have a lot of information on our website about this. And if you have questions, specific questions, we can answer those. But one particular thing we want to point out is that the utilities are so hardwired, they've captured the regulators so much in the government that the CPUC, when they do their math on rooftop solar, they actually use a consulting firm. They don't do their own math. They don't have in-house mathematicians or energy economists to do this. They hire a consulting firm to do their math. And that consulting firm is a firm called E3, Energy Environmental Economics. And all you have to do is go to their website and look at their client list to see that most of their clients are all of the major private North American utilities, including PG&E, Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. So it is no surprise that CPUC's numbers are completely cooked in favor of the utilities because the utilities' own consulting firm is the one that's doing the math and doing it to basically try to peg math to what essentially was a public relations strategy that goes back, almost 15 years. Okay, so sorry for the flipping around. I'm going to send it back to you, Kaylee. Oh, wait, well, just one more thing here, which is we're not the only ones saying this. Dr. McCann is not the only one saying this. We have very distinguished academics at Stanford. There's recently 12 very, very, credentialed energy economists who examined Dr. McCann's work and wrote a letter basically going, we agree with these findings. We think his work is sound. So this is not a one-off. This is something that has got a lot of consensus among serious energy economists and experts in all of this stuff. Okay, so there's real world consequences to this kind of lie. And so to explain what those real world consequences are, I'm going to hand this back to Kaylee.
So, as I think most folks watching this webinar probably know, the monopoly utilities and their allies have used this lie to try to undermine rooftop solar, to try to take a hammer to it because they are viewing rooftop solar as their main competition. When we have more rooftop solar, we need less of those poles and wires that they profit off of. And so they convinced the California Public Utility Commission to drastically slash the rooftop solar program that was allowing solar to pencil out for folks in the state of California. And I want to just note for a moment here that what Dave is saying about this shift with this PR firm is notable. Rooftop solar is awesome. And the public and the legislators viewed it that way until the utilities used this PR firm's stuff to put this lie in front of legislators over and over and over again, and in front of the California Public Utilities Commission over and over and over again. And here we see the real world consequences of that. After the California Public Utility Commission decided to send rooftop solar off a cliff, it has hurt everyone, but it has especially hurt working and middle class folks. And this chart shows who was going solar prior to this cut. And so I want to draw your attention to the dark blue on the bottom and the orange on the bottom. The dark blue are households that earn less than $50,000 a year, certainly low income in the state of California. And then the orange are households that earn between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. Again, low income in the state of California. Check out those numbers. Those were the folks who were really benefiting from rooftop solar, whose numbers were growing and growing very steadily. And then, bam, you see the impact of this cut in the rooftop solar program, and it has not recovered. That orange bar, that blue bar, that's not back where it was before. That's significantly lower. And this decision has set us back substantially. And it's not just the solar users who were hurt. And sorry. So, well, if we can back up one slide, sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So it's not just rooftop solar users who were hurt, it's also the state's energy goals. The CPUC claimed that this switch from what's called NEM 2 to NEM 3, the net metering program that allowed solar to pencil out for folks, would result in more battery adoptions, but that hasn't happened either. Here you see the blue bars are what was actually installed in terms of battery storage in California, and the orange bars are what we could have had. So we could have had significantly more batteries installed in California if we hadn't made this drastic cut to NEM 3, just as we had warned. So it hurt regular average folks who were trying to go solar, it hurt the state's clean energy goals, and it hurt the industry. There have been massive job losses in the solar industry field. 17,000 jobs have been lost as a direct result of this drastic cut and switch to NEM 3. As you can see in this graph, significantly more jobs were lost here than even in the COVID-19 pandemic, and it represents 22% of all solar jobs in California. So it's quite substantial. Another thing to note is that we absolutely need more rooftop solar in order to hit California's clean energy goals. So you see this graph here. The blue represents utility scale solar, and the orange represents rooftop solar. And the California Energy Commission estimates that California needs to build an additional 90 gigawatts of solar energy to meet its climate change goals by 2045. Just visually, you can see in this graph that is not going to happen unless the rooftop solar market gets growing again. And I will just pause here and say, one of the incredible things about rooftop solar is that it is distributed, meaning it can be deployed everywhere right now on lots and lots and lots of already built and already available rooftops and parking lots and garages that are ready for rooftop solar now. And because there is an industry in California that's set up to do this work, it can happen really quickly, and we need it to happen really quickly. Whereas utility scale solar, there's just only so many places you can put it. There's only so fast it can be done. And then you have to run these really expensive poles and wires from wherever you put the giant solar farm to wherever the energy is going. And that is a huge incentive for the utilities because, again, they're going to make that money on those poles and wires. But the faster, better way to get rooftop solar out there is this with rooftop solar to help meet the state's clean energy goals. So we can do this if we can get rooftop solar growing again. And I'll pass it back to Dave to talk about what that might look like.
Okay, great. Thanks. And just one thing to kind of add to that is like, we don't have any problem with solar farms and wind farms. We're kind of a all of the above type of group. So it's not like do this, don't do that. It's just to say it's ludicrous for us to be cutting off rooftop solar. Rooftop solar is a key part of everything that the state is trying to do. And it's a key way to make everything else that the state is doing cheaper
Right.
because it just makes more sense to have consumers make as much of their electricity as possible using their private dollars and their private rooftops to do so. And it's just the same as if you could get people to turn off their lights more and not use the AC more, all those kinds of things just makes it so that the utility does not have to deliver as much electricity to the people of California. And it's a key strategy. And so we just need it, but not at the expense of everything. It's just part of a balanced strategy. And we're now very, very unbalanced because of the undue influence of the utilities. Okay, so let's go forward then. So hopefully, we've made the case here that more rooftop solar and batteries benefits everyone, not just the people that have it, but the entire state of California in so many different ways. This is a key strategy. It's just so smart. And it's just amazing the consumers that have done it. And that kind of gets to another point, which is it's really, really awful that the utilities are slandering their customers, scapegoating their customers for their own failure. And then quite frankly, I find it disgusting that the Newsom administration is just signing on to that and just like essentially slandering everyday people, working middle class people who've stretched because they're suffocating under high electricity bills. And so they're stretching. They're tapping into their mortgages. They are getting loans. They're tapping into their savings to put solar panels on their roof because they know it's a good longer term investment, and that it helps them actually have a sustainable household. But also, it's helping the entire state meet everything that it's doing. We should be celebrating these people as heroes for both taking care of their own household and, in the course of doing so, taking care of their neighbors and their community and the people of this state. So we need a real mindset change here among the politicians. It's very unseemly. I just find it so offensive the way that the Newsom administration has really just bought into this lie about everyday people. And so that's another thing. And then, the potential is just so awesomely enormous. I don't even know if that's a real phrase. But so this is the National Renewable Energy Lab's projection of how much solar we could get from rooftops. This blue down here is what we have right now. About 16 gigawatts of energy is right now being generated from solar panels that are on rooftops right now, the 2 million that we have. We could get another 54 million from other rooftops. Like this would be more residential homes, single family homes, apartment buildings, and that kind of stuff. And then we could get another 30 gigawatts from like parking lots and big box stores and factories and that kind of thing. So the amount that we could be growing rooftop solar if our state's leaders get their heads screwed on straight is tremendous and could just help to solve so many problems at the kitchen table level all the way up to the state level. So then in terms of how to turn the ship around, it's pretty simple. Certainly, we need a mindset change by the politicians. And by the way, the regulators simply do what the politicians want. So, we focus a lot on the CPUC, but they're appointed by the governor. And generally, they claim to be an independent agency, but pretty much anyone in Sacramento knows that the agency works at the pleasure of the governor. The governor will micromanage that. And that's just not a Governor Newsom thing. That goes back for as long as, anyone can remember. Governors generally have a lot of power here. And so what we want to focus on is the actual lawmakers, the ones that we elect. And this both is for the governor and it's also for the state legislature because they have a say in all of this as well. So the first thing is let's stand by the consumer's right to make energy from the sun without penalty. And let's not do any more harm to rooftop solar. So what that would mean is first, let's stop harassing solar consumers on NEM 1 and NEM 2. These are the programs that were in existence before the CPUC made the changes that Kaylee talked about. Right now, the Newsom administration is making noises that they want to open up the contracts that these customers signed that allow them to be able to stay on that program for the lifetime of their system, which is about 20 years. And so that obviously would be incredibly unfair. It would be breaking a promise. It would be screwing those consumers because they made an investment thinking that there was going to be under certain circumstances. And then, of course, it'll undermine consumer confidence in rooftop solar going forward. So we should just cut that out. That's kind of obvious. We should be rejecting any form of a high fixed charge. So the state is already moving forward with a $26 a month utility tax that's going to be on most ratepayers starting next year. They certainly shouldn't make it any bigger. And really, they should just listen to what legislators were asking for last year and roll it back to about $10 a month, no more than that, because that's the national average and it's a reasonable amount to collect, but nothing more than that. And then certainly we should not be doing any solar taxes. Well, that gets proposed every year. Every year it has been defeated thanks to our allies in the legislature and your voices, of course, which are the ones that give them the courage and inspiration to stand up for consumers. But it's like the height of ridiculousness to tax people for putting solar panels on their roof. You might tax people for cigarettes, and other kinds of like detrimental behavior, but taxing people for putting solar panels on their roof would be like taxing people for helping elderly people walk across the street. It just makes no sense. And then there's an agency decision, a different agency that's run amok that has banned licensed solar contractors from installing batteries, even the batteries on systems that they themselves installed. We're right now part of a lawsuit to reverse that, but we ought to be reversing that stuff. That's just nonsense. So we should do no more harm. Then we should start thinking about getting rooftop solar and batteries growing again. We should start thinking big again. What happened to the days of Governor Schwarzenegger in the legislature when Governor Schwarzenegger says we're going to have 1 million solar powered batteries and 1 million solar rooftops. And at that time, there wasn't very much solar. It was a vision and it made a lot of sense. And we put policies in place to make that vision happen. Let's set a new goal that maximizes the use of California's rooftops, 5 million solar powered rooftops. And then we should be thinking about batteries as like really, really key. Right now, batteries are a little too spendy for most consumers. Let's figure out how we can make it cheaper. And so let's do 1 million solar powered batteries program, just that's modeled off what we did for solar panels and do it for batteries. It's not a forever program. What we find is that these programs can be put in place for 5 to 7 years. They drive down the cost and then the market takes off from there. So there's so many things we can be doing to just think big again that is right in front of us. Of course, then we need to remove this crazy incentive that causes utilities to block rooftop solar and batteries and overspend. So, there's a lot of people that say that we ought to make utilities public. That's obviously one thing is just buy out or just ditch PG&E and do what they do in Sacramento and LA. That's one solution. Another solution would be what they're doing in Hawaii, which is just going, instead of paying utilities a profit when they build more stuff, Why don't we pay them to actually deliver better services? Say you get a profit if you keep rates at the rate, spending at the rate of inflation. You do profits if you keep blackouts to a minimum. You do profits if, we don't see your lines sparking wildfires. Like you can actually build a system that way so that the incentives are in the right way. And so Hawaii is experimenting with that. The state ought to do that here. And then we just got to hold the utilities accountable. I mean, this is just like basic stuff. The first thing we ought to be doing is looking for ways to not have to spend as much on poles and wires. Let's have more rooftop solar and batteries. Let's figure out, geez, instead of building transmission and distribution lines over there, how about we really focus on getting those residents solar and batteries? And then we're going to save billions of dollars right there. And then when we do decide that utilities, yeah, maybe they do need to build some poles and wires, in this part, let's audit their spending. It's amazing. I didn't know this until this year that the CPUC actually does not audit the utility spending. So we don't even, in many cases, know whether they've spent the money that they were already collected from customers and whether they spent it properly. And then, of course, if they don't spend it right, don't approve new spending. And certainly, if they haven't spent the money that they already collected, then either give it back to the ratepayers or make them go spend it on something good. So these are all things that you can write into bills and pass into law. And some of these things you don't even need a new law for. You just need a better CPUC. And of course, these are all great ideas, but the way that we make them happen is you. It's your voice that has been able to stop solar taxes from being put in place. That's really, really huge. And it's your voice that's going to help to turn the ship around. There are already a lot of legislators that are listening. One thing that I saw last year was some green shoots in the state legislature. An almost supermajority of the legislature passed a bill that would have reversed some of the damage that the CPUC has done, and it actually passed. It was vetoed by Governor Newsom, which tells you a lot. But the legislature, to their credit, it was an almost supermajority that took a first step towards trying to reverse some of this damage. And in the course of doing so, we're hearing a lot more legislators pushing back on these lies and saying, geez, we really got to get rooftop solar growing again. We really got to hold utilities accountable. And obviously, actions speak louder than words, but we're starting to see that too. And that's because of you. I believe very, very strongly that because you have been so vocal to your lawmakers over the last couple of years and all of this stuff, that we're starting to see some of the more thoughtful ones, and there are thoughtful ones there, going, I need to do something about this. So go to our website. This is the URL, and it's in the show notes as well. And sign up. Obviously, sign up so we can tell you what's going on. Subscribe on our social media channels. And then you'll see on this website in particular, we have a toolkit for you and actions that you can take to kind of get started. And we have a lot of actions that are simple. We have actions that are a little bit more sophisticated. We want to give you a menu of things so that with the time that you have, that you can make your voice heard in as powerful a way as possible. And so I think you'll want to probably say something here too, Kaylee, is just I think we really want to thank you for obviously tuning in and taking the time to kind of absorb this information, but also thank you for just everything that you do, whether it's just putting solar panels on your roof, but also speaking up, writing and emailing and calling, testifying. All those things really do make a difference. The utilities have a lot of money, but they don't really have the people behind them. We are the people, and this is our state, dang it. And so let's actually assert our power and our rights here. So keep it up, folks. You're doing a great job. Kaylee, what would you like to add?
Just to reiterate what you said again, thank you for everything that you do. It really does make a difference when you make that phone call, when you send that petition, when you go to your legislator's office and you speak with them in person. It matters. It changes minds. It changes the trajectory of what is happening. We've seen that over and over. The fact that you all have stopped the solar tax over and over and over again in all kinds of different venues, in all kinds of different ways is incredible. It's absolutely remarkable. And you deserve the credit for that. And so really, thank you. Thank you for coming here to learn the information, to learn the facts. And again, just to reiterate, I know we said it several times, but if you have a question that you felt wasn't answered in this presentation, or that is about something else that you would like to learn more about, please, please reach out to us, info@solarrights.org, and we'd be happy to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming.